The morning my father told me not to come home, I was standing in the hallway of our house holding a single box of my things. He did not raise his voice. He did not slam a door. He just looked at me the way someone looks at a stranger they have decided is no longer worth their time, and he said very quietly that as far as he was concerned, I had made my choice and chosen wrong. That was the last thing he said to me for 6 months. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that the choice I made that morning was the one that would eventually change everything. He thought he was watching me fall. He was actually watching me leave the starting line. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If the people who were supposed to believe in you the most were the first ones to walk away, would you fold to bring them back, or would you keep building until the result said everything your words never could? Think about that as you hear what Ackles did, because her answer to that question is the whole story. Ackles was 26 years old the morning her father told her not to come home. She had woken up that day already knowing the conversation was coming. She had rehearsed it in her head more times than she could count, tried to find the version of the words that would make him understand, tried to imagine his face softening, tried to picture him nodding slowly and saying something like, "I don't fully understand, but I trust you." She had imagined that version of the conversation for weeks. What she got was nothing like it. Her name was Ackles Merritt. She had been born and raised in a house in Deerfield, a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, where the lawns were always trimmed and the neighbors always waved, and the Merritt family reputation meant something. Her father, Gerald Merritt, was a respected civil attorney who had spent 31 years building a practice that bore his name and his principles. Her mother, Diane, had taught high school English for 2 decades and believed deeply in the power of education. Her older brother, Caleb, had followed Gerald into law, passed the bar on his first attempt, and joined the practice 3 years before the morning Ackles stood in that hallway. The family, from the outside, looked like a picture of earned success. From the inside, Ackles had spent most of her life trying to fit a shape she was not built for. She had always been the quiet one, the observer, the daughter who read every room before she walked into it. She had been a strong student, graduated near the top of her high school class, and earned a full academic scholarship to Ohio State, where she studied finance and fell deeply, genuinely in love with numbers. Not in the abstract, cold way people imagine when they think of finance. In the human way, the way that saw money as a story. The way that understood that every property, every deal, every building had a history behind it and a future depending on what happened next. Ackles discovered real estate during her junior year when a professor assigned a case study on commercial property development in mid-sized American cities. She spent more time on that project than any other assignment she had ever done in her life. She could not explain exactly why, except that it felt like she had finally found the language she had been searching for without knowing it. Her father had other plans. Gerald Merritt had decided sometime during Ackles' senior year of college that she would go to law school. It was not a discussion. It was an announcement. He had already identified 3 programs he approved of. He had already mapped out the kind of practice she could join after passing the bar. He had already in his mind folded her into the future he had spent decades building. Ackles sat at the dinner table the night he laid it all out and nodded in the places that seemed to require nodding, and said very little, and felt the quiet weight of it settle onto her shoulders like something she had not agreed to carry. She applied to law school because she did not know how not to. She was accepted at 2 of the 3 programs her father had chosen. She chose the closer one, enrolled, and spent the first semester trying to convince herself that she would find the same feeling in contract law that she had found in real estate analysis. She did not find it. What she found instead was a growing certainty that she was spending her days learning something she would spend the rest of her life doing for someone else's reasons, and that was a thought she could not afford to sit with for long without it growing into something she could not control. During that first year of law school, Ackles started reading everything she could find about real estate development. She read it at night after her law school assignments were done. She read it on weekends. She started following developers online, reading their interviews, watching their project announcements, trying to understand how people moved from studying the industry to actually operating inside it. She found a woman in Cleveland named Rosa Haverford who had built a residential and commercial portfolio from nothing over 20 years, starting with a single duplex she had purchased with money she had saved from 2 jobs. Ackles emailed Rosa on a Thursday night without expecting a response. Rosa responded the following Monday morning and asked what Ackles was working toward. That email exchange turned into a phone call. That phone call turned into 3 more. By the end of her first year of law school, Ackles had a part-time mentorship with Rosa Haverford, a growing clarity about what she actually wanted to build, and a deeply uncomfortable awareness that she was standing in exactly the wrong place for her life. She finished her first-year exams, came home for summer, and told her father she was leaving law school. Gerald Merritt heard the words. He set down his coffee cup. He looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he told her in the same quiet, measured voice he used in courtrooms when he wanted the jury to understand something without having to raise his tone, that she was making the worst decision of her life. He told her that real estate was not a career, it was a gamble, and that the Merritt name had been built on stable, honorable work that actually helped people. He told her that the scholarship opportunity she was walking away from was something people would spend years fighting for. He told her that if she walked out of law school, she was walking out on the family's support, the family's respect, and the family's door. Ackles asked him if he meant that. He said he did. He said she understood. She went upstairs, packed one box of the things that mattered most to her, brought it back downstairs, and stood in the hallway where her father was still standing, waiting to see if she would reconsider. She looked at him and told him she loved him. He said nothing. She picked up her box and walked out. She drove back to her apartment near campus with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the box in the passenger seat, and she did not cry until she was parked in her own driveway with the engine off. She let herself have 20 minutes of it. Then she went inside, made tea, opened her laptop, and started writing a one-page plan for what she was going to do next. The first call she made the following morning was to Rosa Haverford. Rosa listened to the full story without interrupting. When Ackles was done, Rosa was quiet for a moment and then said something Ackles would write down and keep on a sticky note above her desk for the next 2 years. Rosa said that the people who have the most to say about the path you're taking are almost always people who never walked it themselves. She told Ackles to be careful not to spend her energy trying to prove anything to anyone who had already decided not to believe her. She told her to put her head down, learn fast, and let the work do the convincing when the time came. Ackles took that seriously. She withdrew from law school officially 3 days later. She had been careful with money throughout college and had saved just over $14,000. She had no family financial support, no safety net, and no title or credential in the field she was walking into. What she had was a mentor who was willing to bring her into real work, a finance degree that gave her a strong foundation in numbers and risk, and a kind of focus that only comes when someone removes every comfortable option from the table and leaves you with only forward. Rosa brought Ackles on as an unpaid assistant for the first 3 months, which meant Ackles worked 2 part-time jobs alongside the mentorship to keep herself fed and housed. She worked mornings at a property management company answering phones and scheduling maintenance visits. She worked evenings at a copy center near campus. In the middle of the day, she sat in Rosa's office and watched how deals were structured, how financing was assembled, how properties were evaluated, how negotiations moved, and how problems got solved when they appeared out of nowhere, which in real estate was often. She asked questions that Rosa said were the right kind, the kind that came from someone who was actually trying to understand the mechanics rather than just trying to sound smart. By the end of those 3 months, Rosa offered her a paid position as a junior analyst on the team. It was not a large salary, but it was real, it was in the field, and it meant Ackles could drop one of her 2 part-time jobs and put those hours into learning more. Back in Deerfield, the family had adjusted to her absence by not discussing it. Her mother sent a text about 6 weeks after the hallway moment that said simply, "I hope you are eating." Ackles responded that she was fine and left it there. Her brother Caleb sent nothing, her father sent nothing. The F. Emily group chat, which had always been active with shared articles and dinner scheduling and the occasional family photo, went quiet when it came to anything involving Ackles. She noticed, she absorbed it, she kept moving. The first time she truly understood the scope of what real estate development involved, it was because Rosa let her sit in on a financing meeting for a mixed-use commercial property in downtown Akron. The project was worth roughly $3 million. Ackles watched how the different pieces of the deal were assembled, watched how Rosa presented the numbers, watched how she handled the questions from the lender, and walked out of that room with more understanding of the actual machinery of real estate than she had gained from any textbook. She went home that evening and stayed up until 2 in the morning writing detailed notes on everything she had observed, connecting it to what she had read, filling in the gaps with questions she would bring to Rosa the next morning. That became her rhythm: observe everything, write everything down, ask the smart question, read the answer into the next observation. Over the following months, Ackles began to take on more responsibility. Rosa trusted her with property analysis reports. She trusted her with initial lender communication drafts. She trusted her to sit in on client meetings and take notes that were detailed enough to be useful rather than just decorative. Ackles never asked for credit she had not earned. She never pushed for a title before she had the depth to back it up. She just kept showing up, kept going deeper, kept building the kind of knowledge that cannot be faked because it comes from actual repetition and actual stakes. It was during this period that she first heard about the Caldwell Corridor project. The Caldwell Corridor was a stretch of underused commercial and light industrial property in the eastern edge of Columbus. It had been sitting in various states of partial development and neglect for over a decade. The area had good infrastructure, proximity to a growing residential neighborhood, and a city planning office that had been making quiet noises about rezoning and incentive packages for the right kind of mixed-use development. Rosa had been watching it for almost 2 years. She believed, with the right partners and the right financing structure, there was a significant opportunity to acquire and develop a section of the corridor in a way that would serve the community and create a substantial return. When Rosa brought Ackles into the early analysis phase of the Caldwell Corridor project, she was clear about what role Ackles would play. She was not going to be a bystander. She was going to be a working contributor. She would own the financial modeling for the project. She would own the due diligence reports. She would sit in every significant meeting and be expected to contribute meaningfully, not just observe. Ackles said yes the same way she always said yes to something that mattered, without noise and with complete intention. She threw herself into the Caldwell Corridor analysis with the same energy she had brought to that junior year case study at Ohio State, except now the stakes were real and the numbers were not hypothetical. She spent weeks building a detailed financial model that looked at multiple acquisition scenarios, multiple development timelines, multiple financing structures, and multiple exit strategies. She identified a specific parcel of roughly 4 acres that she believed represented the strongest entry point for the project. She built a comparative analysis of similar corridor redevelopments in other mid-sized Midwest cities, pulled the performance data, and distilled it into a clear and actionable summary that Rosa reviewed and said was the most thorough junior-level analysis she had seen in years. That was 14 months after Ackles had left law school. At home, meaning the Deerfield house, nothing had changed. Her father had not called, her brother had not reached out. Her mother had upgraded from single-sentence text to occasional messages that carried the emotional weight of someone trying to bridge a gap without fully committing to crossing it. Ackles answered those messages honestly but briefly. She did not perform. She did not beg. She did not call Deerfield and report her progress in hopes of changing someone's mind. She had understood, somewhere in those early months of silence, that she was not going to earn her father's respect by asking for it. She was going to have to build something real enough that the silence became impossible to sustain on his end. She was not building it for him, she was building it for herself. But she was not naive about the fact that proof, visible and concrete proof, was the only language people like Ackles Merritt were willing to speak. The Caldwell Corridor project moved slowly through its early phases, which is the reality of development work that nobody who has not done it fully appreciates. There were city meetings, there were zoning consultations, there were conversations with potential anchor tenants that went back and forth for months before producing anything definitive. Ackles was present for all of it. She learned how to manage the pace without losing focus. She learned how to hold a complicated negotiation in her head without letting the pressure of the timeline compromise her judgment on the substance. Rosa was watching her the whole time, not in a suspicious way, in the way of someone who is deciding how far to trust. About 19 months after Ackles left law school, Rosa sat her down for a conversation that Ackles had not fully anticipated. Rosa said she had been thinking about the structure of the Caldwell Corridor deal and the way it was developing, and that she believed there was a version of this project that Ackles should be part of, not just as an employee but as a partner. Not a full partner, not yet. But a meaningful stakeholder position that would reflect the work she had actually put into the analysis and the development of the opportunity. Rosa explained what that would mean in practical terms, what it would require from Ackles financially and professionally, and what it could potentially produce over the next several years if the development performed as their model suggested it would. Ackles sat across from Rosa in the office she had spent the past 19 months learning inside and out, and she understood exactly what was being offered and what it meant. She asked for a few days to review the full structure of the proposed arrangement. Rosa said, of course. Ackles spent 3 days going over every number, every condition, every risk factor she could identify. She consulted a lawyer she had connected with through a professional network Rosa had introduced her to. She asked careful questions and got careful answers. Then she went back to Rosa and said yes, with 2 specific adjustments to the proposed terms that she had identified and that Rosa reviewed and agreed were reasonable. That was the day Ackles became a junior development partner on the Caldwell Corridor project. She was 27 years old. She had been out of law school for 19 months. She had no family financial support, no inherited connections, and no credential beyond her finance degree and the experience. She had built one unglamorous task at a time in Rosa's office. She had something better than credentials, though. She had deep, specific, earned knowledge of this exact deal, and she had the trust of the person leading it. The next several months were the hardest of her professional life, and also the most alive she had ever felt doing work. The project moved into its active financing phase, which meant Ackles was spending long days in detailed lender conversations, working through due diligence requests that arrived in waves, revising financial models when market conditions shifted slightly, and managing the coordination between the city planning process and the private development timeline. She worked hours that she did not count because counting them would have felt like complaining about something she had chosen deliberately. There was one evening, about 22 months after she had left law school, when she was sitting at her desk at 9 o'clock at night with 3 browser tabs open to city planning documents, a spreadsheet she had been working on since 6 in the morning, and a cold cup of tea she had forgot to drink, and she had a sudden, sharp memory of the hallway, her father's face, the quiet way he had dismissed everything she was without raising his voice. She sat with that memory for about 30 seconds. Then she saved her spreadsheet, made a fresh cup of tea, and went back to work. She did not call Deerfield that night. She also did not need to. The financing for the Caldwell Corridor project was secured in full approximately 24 months after Ackles had left law school. The deal, when fully structured and valued, represented an $8.5 million development investment in a piece of Columbus's east side that had been sitting underutilized for over a decade. Ackles Merritt held a junior partner stake in that deal. She had contributed directly to every significant phase of the analysis, the financing structure, and the development planning that made the deal possible. Her name was on the partnership documents. Her work was inside every number. The day they signed the final closing documents, Rosa took the small team out to dinner at a restaurant in downtown Columbus that had views of the river. There were 4 people at the table. Rosa sat at the head. Ackles sat across from the 2 other partners, both of whom she had worked alongside for months and genuinely respected. They ordered good food and drank wine that cost more than Ackles' first weekly paycheck at the copy center had been, and they talked through the project and the work. What came next? It was a quiet dinner, not loud or performative, which suited Ackles exactly. When Rosa raised her glass and said a few brief words about what the team had accomplished and what it had taken to get there, Ackles felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for 2 years. Not triumph exactly, more like alignment, like finally being in the right room for the right reasons. She drove home that night and sat in her apartment and thought about calling her mother. She decided to wait. Not because she was waiting for the right moment to announce something, but because she had learned that the right moment for something important is never when you are still inside the feeling of it. She would wait until it was simply true and settled, and then she would decide what to say and to whom. She did not have to wait long to learn that the news was already traveling without her. Ackles had been quiet about her work on social media, but the development deal itself was not invisible. When a project the size of the Caldwell Corridor closes, it creates a paper trail. There are public records, there are local business journal announcements, there are real estate industry newsletters. Rosa's firm had a modest professional presence online. The deal was noted in 2 Columbus business publications and 1 regional real estate newsletter as a significant development investment in the Caldwell Corridor area, and the names of the partners involved were part of the public record. It was Caleb who saw it first. Her brother, who had not sent her a single message in 2 years, sent a text on a Tuesday morning that said only, "I saw the Columbus business piece. Is that you?" Ackles looked at the text for a moment before responding. She wrote back that yes, it was her, and then put her phone face down and went back to the report she was reviewing. Caleb sent 3 more messages over the next 2 hours. She read them later. Her mother called that evening. Diane Merritt's voice on the phone had a quality Ackles had not heard in 2 years, something between relief and guilt and something she could not quite name that lived in the space between words. Diane said she had seen the article. She said she was proud of Ackles. She said those words in the halting way of someone who knew they were arriving too late but was saying them anyway because staying silent would be worse. Ackles thanked her mother and kept the call brief. She was not cruel about it, she was not cold. She was simply honest, the way she had been learning to be honest for 2 years without performing either bitterness or forgiveness. Gerald Merritt called 4 days later. Ackles almost did not answer. She was between meetings, standing in the parking lot of a coffee shop in downtown Columbus with her phone in her hand and her father's name on the screen. She looked at it for 3 full rings, then she answered. Her father said her name, she said hello. There was a pause that lasted long enough to contain everything neither of them had said for 2 years. Then Gerald said he had seen the article. He said he had read about the project. He said he wanted to know if she was doing well. Ackles said she was doing well. He said that was good. He said the project sounded like a significant undertaking. He said he was glad it had gone well for her. She waited. He said he thought perhaps it would be good if they talked, if she could come to Deerfield maybe for dinner. He said her mother would like to see her. Ackles stood in the parking lot and thought about the hallway. She thought about the box she had carried out of the house she had grown up in. She thought about the 20 minutes she had let herself cry in her own driveway and the tea she had made afterward and the 1-page plan she had written on her laptop. She thought about the copy center and the property management office and the 19 months of unglamorous, essential real work that had led to a seat at the table where her name was on a closing document for an $8.5 million deal. She thought about what her father had said when she told him she was leaving, that she was making the worst decision of her life. She said she would think about dinner and would let him know. She was polite, she was calm, she did not give him an answer he could hold on to. She ended the call, finished her coffee, and went to her next meeting. What happened over the following weeks was not a dramatic confrontation. It was something quieter and in some ways more uncomfortable, which is the actual texture of family repair when it is happening honestly. Ackles did go to Deerfield eventually. She drove out on a Saturday afternoon about 3 weeks after the phone call from her father. She had thought carefully about what she wanted from that visit and what she did not want, and she had decided she wanted one honest conversation, not a performance of reunion. The house looked the same, the lawn was trimmed, the neighbors waved. When she pulled into the driveway, she sat in the car for 2 minutes before going inside. Her mother opened the door before she could knock. Diane Merritt's face in that moment was something Ackles kept to herself. It was private in the way that complicated love is always private. They embraced in the doorway. Her mother held on a moment longer than usual. Ackles let her. Her father was in the living room. Gerald Merritt looked older than he had 2 years ago in the way people do when something has been weighing on them, though they would never say it in those words. He stood when Ackles came into the room. He did not move toward her immediately. He stood and looked at his daughter in a way that had more complexity in it than anything he had said on the phone. Ackles crossed the room and they embraced briefly, the awkward embrace of people who have not figured out yet how to be in the same room again. They had dinner. Her mother had made the kind of meal that is an apology in the form of food. Caleb was not there. He had sent a message earlier in the week saying he had a prior commitment but that maybe they could all get together soon. Ackles had read that message and understood it for what it was, someone managing their own discomfort by not showing up, and filed it accordingly. At dinner, her father talked about the Caldwell Corridor project more than she expected. He had clearly read everything he could find. He asked specific questions about the deal structure, about the city involvement, about the development timeline. The questions were the questions of an attorney who knows how to analyze a situation and who is covering his genuine interest in something by framing it as professional curiosity. Ackles answered clearly and specifically. She did not over-explain. She did not offer more than he asked. She did not perform gratitude for his interest, but she also did not make him feel punished for having it. At one point, her father set down his fork and said something that she had not expected him to say. He said that he had told himself after she left that she would come back. That reality would catch up with her and she would come back. And that he had sat with the fact that she had not come back and had not needed to for 2 years, and that he had found that unexpectedly difficult to process. He said he was not sure he was apologizing because he still believed the concerns he had expressed were real concerns. But he said he was willing to admit that the way he had expressed them and what he had said to her that morning in the hallway had not been something a father should say to his daughter. Ackles listened to all of it. Then she said that she understood he had real concerns, and that she also understood that what he had said in the hallway had not simply been a statement of those concerns. It had been a door closing. And that doors once closed that way do not reopen just because things turned out better than expected. She said she was there for dinner because she loved her family, not because the deal had closed. She said she hoped that distinction was clear. Her father looked at her for a moment and then nodded. He said he understood the distinction. They finished dinner. Her mother brought out dessert. The conversation moved to lighter things: the neighbor whose dog had gotten loose twice this month, a show her mother had started watching, the early signs of autumn showing up in the trees along the street. It was not a fully healed dinner, but it was an honest one, and for Ackles, honesty was the only foundation she was willing to build anything on anymore. She drove home that evening with the windows down because the air was the right temperature for it. She thought about what her father had said, the part about finding it unexpectedly difficult to process that she had not come back. She thought about what that meant, not as a wound, but as information. Her father was a man who had built his identity on being right about important things. 2 years of her not coming back and not failing had quietly dismantled a narrative he had built in the time after she walked out. That dismantling was not something she had done to him. It was something the truth had done, slowly and without noise, the way truth tends to work when you stop trying to make it happen and just keep building. She thought about Rosa telling her not to spend her energy trying to prove anything to people who had already decided not to believe her. She had mostly honored that. There had been moments, especially in the early months, when she had felt the pull of wanting to call Deerfield and say, look what I'm doing, are you watching? She had felt that pull and had chosen not to act on it every single time. The result was that when the proof arrived, it arrived without her fingerprints on it. It arrived as a public record, as a signed document, as a deal that existed regardless of what anyone in Deerfield thought about it. That, she realized on the drive home, was the version of vindication that actually meant something. 3 months after that Saturday dinner, Caleb reached out properly for the first time. He called on a Sunday morning and they talked for almost an hour. Caleb was, at his core, someone who had made a choice about who he was going to be in the family by observing very early that alignment with their father was the safest position to hold. He had maintained that alignment faithfully, and it had cost him very little in the years when Ackles was the one absorbing the cost. He knew this now in a way he had not fully let himself know it before. He did not say all of this in those words, but it was present in how he spoke, in the careful quality of his sentences, in the places where he paused a beat longer than necessary. Ackles listened without making it easier or harder for him. She let him say what he was trying to say. When he was done, she said she appreciated the call and that she hoped they could find a way to actually know each other as adults. He said he hoped so too. She meant what she said. But she also understood that hope is a beginning, not a resolution, and that actually knowing someone takes time and presence and repeated honest interaction that has nothing to do with a deal being in a newspaper. The Caldwell Corridor development moved into its active construction phase in the months following the closing, and Ackles' role expanded with it. Rosa made her the primary point of contact for the city's project liaison office, which meant Ackles was now managing the relationship between the development team and the municipal process in real time. She was attending city council subcommittee meetings. She was coordinating with contractors. She was tracking the budget against projections and flagging discrepancies early enough to address them before they became problems. She was doing, in other words, the actual work of someone who was not just a partner on paper but a partner in practice. The project had its complications because every project of that scale does. There was a period of about 6 weeks when a soil remediation finding on one section of the property added unexpected cost and timeline pressure to one phase of the development. Ackles worked through that problem methodically, coordinating between the environmental consultant, the construction team, the lender's project monitor, and the city, and found a sequencing solution that kept the overall project on timeline without absorbing the full cost impact that the initial finding had suggested. Rosa said afterward that the way Ackles had handled the remediation issue was the moment she knew for certain she had made the right call in bringing her in as a partner. Ackles kept that comment in the same mental file where she kept Rosa's early advice about the sticky note. She did not need it to feel good about her work. She did the work because it needed to be done, and she was the one who knew how to do it. But she was also honest enough with herself to acknowledge that those words, from someone whose judgment she genuinely respected, meant something. Meanwhile, back in Deerfield, something interesting was happening that Ackles did not orchestrate and did not expect. Gerald Merritt had been telling people about his daughter, not loudly, not in the way of someone performing Pride for an audience, but in the quiet way that information moves through a professional community when someone's reputation shifts. A colleague of Gerald's from the Columbus Bar Association mentioned to Rosa through a mutual contact that Gerald Merritt had spoken highly of Rosa's firm at a recent legal event. Rosa mentioned this to Ackles with some amusement in her voice. Ackles listened and said nothing, which Rosa seemed to find satisfying in its own way. Her father was adapting to a truth he had not written. That required its own kind of respect, even if it came years and one $8.5 million deal late. The Saturday dinners became a somewhat regular thing. Not every week, not even every month, but occasional. Ackles drove out to Deerfield when the timing worked and she was in the right headspace for it, and they ate and talked and moved slowly through the process of becoming a family that was honest with each other rather than one that performed togetherness. It was not always comfortable. Her father still had strong opinions. He still sometimes expressed them in ways that required Ackles to respond firmly and clearly. But he also, over time, stopped being someone who expressed those opinions as if they were facts about her life rather than preferences about his. That shift, subtle as it was, made the dinners worth having. Caleb joined one of those dinners about 4 months after his Sunday phone call. He brought a bottle of wine and was slightly awkward in the way of a person who is trying to recalibrate a relationship they handled poorly and does not quite know where to put their hands. Ackles treated him like someone she was getting to know, which was accurate because she was. She asked him questions about his work, about cases he found interesting, about how he was doing in the areas of his life that had nothing to do with their father. He asked her about the Caldwell Corridor project with a genuine curiosity she had not expected. They did not fully repair anything at that dinner, but they put down some shared ground to stand on, and that was more than they had before. Her mother, Diane, had her own way of moving through all of it. She had always been someone who expressed love through action rather than confrontation, which meant she had sometimes enabled the silence by not pushing against it. She was aware of this. She did not say so directly, but she showed it in the care she brought to those Saturday dinners, in the questions she asked about Ackles' actual daily life rather than just the headline achievements, in the way she would sometimes call midweek just to talk about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of bridge building. Ackles received all of it without performing gratitude or performing distance. She let her mother in at the pace her mother was willing to move, which was the kindest thing she could do. It was at one of those Saturday dinners, about 8 months after the deal had closed, that Gerald said something Ackles had genuinely not been prepared for. They were eating after dinner, her mother had stepped away from the table, and Gerald set his cup down and looked at his daughter and said that he owed her an honest statement. He said that when he had told her not to come home that morning, it was not only about the law school decision. He said it was about the fact that her choosing differently had made him feel, for the first time in his career as a father, that he might have been wrong about something important, and that he had responded to that feeling by making it her problem instead of his own. He said that was not something a father should do and that he was sorry for it. Ackles looked at her father across the table. He was 61 years old and he looked, in that moment, like someone who had spent considerable energy arriving at those sentences. She did not make it easy for him and she did not make it hard for him. She told him she had heard him. She told him she accepted what he was saying. She told him that what mattered most to her going forward was not the acknowledgement of what had happened, but whether the pattern changed. She said she was not interested in a family that was close because things had turned out well. She was interested in a family that was honest even when things were uncomfortable. He looked at her for a moment and said that was a reasonable thing to want. She said she thought so too. Her mother came back to the table and the conversation shifted, and they finished the evening the way families do when something real has been said and everyone needs a little time to let it settle. Ackles drove home under a night sky that was cloudless and full of stars, which in Ohio in the autumn is a specific kind of beautiful, and she thought about everything and nothing in particular and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the 2 years of silence and the single hallway moment and all the work in between had landed in a place that was actually worth standing in. The Caldwell Corridor project completed its first construction phase the following spring. The ribbon-cutting event was small and professional, the kind of event that a development team attends because it marks a real milestone rather than because it makes good content. There were city officials present, a few local business journalists, members of the contractor team who had put their physical labor into the project, and Rose's team. Ackles stood in the light of a spring morning in the eastern corridor of Columbus, Ohio, on a piece of land that had been neglected for a decade and was now becoming something the community around it could use, and she let herself feel the full weight of it for exactly as long as the moment deserved. She had not invited her father. She had not needed to. The proof did not require an audience. After the ribbon cutting, she went back to the office and worked the rest of the afternoon. She called Rosa to go over some outstanding items on the second construction phase. She answered emails from the city liaison office. She made notes for a preliminary analysis she was beginning on a different opportunity Rosa had asked her to look at, a smaller commercial property in a neighborhood adjacent to the Caldwell Corridor that had some interesting characteristics worth exploring. That evening, she called her mother to say hello, and her mother asked how the week was going, and Ackles said it had been a good week and meant it. It had been 2 years and 4 months since she had stood in the hallway with one box. She had not gone back to Lois. Jewel. She had not gone back to ask permission. She had gone forward, specifically and deliberately, and had built something real in a field she had loved since the moment she found it in a junior year case study assignment that had given her more clarity than anyone's plan for her life ever had. She was 28 years old. She was a development partner on an $8.5 million project. She had more work ahead of her than she had done so far, which was not a problem but a prospect. She had a mentor she trusted. She had a professional reputation she had built from nothing. She had a family that was imperfect and slowly, honestly learning to be different. And she had something she had not fully understood the value of until she had built it from the ground up with her own choices and her own hands. The knowledge that the foundation under her life had been set by her, not handed to her, not inherited from someone else's plan. That foundation was hers. The work was hers. The closed deal was hers. The future being built on it was hers. No hallway moment could take that. No silence could undo it. No one who had not believed in her had any claim on what she had created without them. Ackles Merritt drove home on a spring evening in Columbus, Ohio, with the windows down, through a city that contained one piece of the East Side that was slightly different because of her work, and felt something that the word success does not fully capture, though it is the closest word we have. She felt like herself, completely and without apology. That, in the end, was the only kind of arrival that had ever mattered. If you have been listening to Ackles' story today, I want to ask you something before you go. Has there been a moment in your life when someone who was supposed to believe in you became the first person to walk out of the room? And did you fold to get them back, or did you build until the building said what you were never given space to say? Leave your answer in the comments. Because I believe the people who are watching this right now are not here by accident, and Ackles' story is not the only one worth telling. Yours might be next.